Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we've got a 1995 Honda Civic in here that has a B20 VTEC. So it's a B20 bottom end with a B16 head. Today we're going to be doing a clutch as well as LSD install. This would be the same procedure for doing a clutch job on most 94 to 2001 Acura Integra as well as most Civics with a B series swap. As you'll notice in this video, this car has some aftermarket options such as a ram air intake as well as a header and exhaust. Most Integras or Civics with a swap, you're not going to see in completely stock the stock air intake as well as stock exhaust. So hopefully you'll be able to relate and use the information from this video. So to begin with, you'll need to jack your car up, use some jack stands put under it, or in my case I have a lift and I've got the car lifted up off the ground probably about 4.5 feet. What we're going to start off with now is getting the wheels off of the car, and this one has aftermarket wheels that use a key, but if you don't have that and you have stock lug nut, they're 19 millimeter. Alright, so now that we have successfully removed both front wheels, we will remove the axle nuts. For the most part, all Honda Civics and Acura Integras are going to be 32 mil. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is separate the ball joint here. You can use the ball joint separator if you have it. I've never used one. I always just take the 17 millimeter. Alright. And this one's already loose because it has aftermarket lower control arms. Sometimes I just have to take my little hammer. Well, first I'll leave the nut on there so I don't hit my threads. I'll take my hammer, just hit right here on the side of the control arm, and it usually pops that right out. You may have to put some pressure up on it while you're hitting it. I usually use this little 2-pound sledgehammer and it works wonders. Alright, so we can see that's loose. Now we need to take this 17 millimeter out, and there's a 14 right up here that we need to take out to be able to take this fork out. Alright, so you can see the axle's ready to come out of the transmission now. I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. This car actually has a stock lower control arm on this side, where the other side has the aftermarket. So I'll actually get to show you how I take this ball joint apart here. Alright, so I know you're probably not having the best angle there, but if I put the camera over here where I'm at, it gets a glare and you can't really see anything. So what I'm doing is I'm hitting on the bottom of the lower control arm on this side. And you can see I left the nut on there so if I miss, I don't hit the threads. And I'm pushing up on the spindle right here with my left hand. See, it took a couple good licks, but it came loose. So I'm gonna continue to take this side apart. All right, so I got both sides disassembled to the point that the axles are ready to come out. So before I take the axles out, I'm gonna drain the transmission. You'll need a 3/8 ratchet, and there's a little drain plug right here on the transmission that you just take out. Got my drain pan here. And we'll let that drain for a few minutes. Alright, so now that we've got the transmission drained, we're going to pop the axles out. The passenger side one's fairly easy. We can get my camera over here. Then so what we're going to do is get our pry bar and put between the axle here and the housing of the transmission and just pry out, and the axle will pop out like so. Alright, so then we got to go get the driver's side one out. Typically what I do on the driver's side is I go ahead and take the outer portion off and then take the hash shaft off. And to do that, back to my 2-pound hammer, take and hit it here. Comes right off. Alright, the next thing we have to do is take the hash shaft off here. It has 3 14 millimeter bolts. And on the B series, all 3 of them have a shoulder. And I'm going to break them loose with my ratchet and then use a little impact to finish them off. Alright, got that one loose. That one loose. And there's one on the passenger side of it right here. Alright, so we got all 3 of those loose now. Just get a little impact. And it just slides out once you get the 3 bolts out. Alright, so you can see on the driver's side it has the 2 bolts here and a bolt here on the passenger side. And they all like this with a little shoulder. So There are 3 bolts for that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is take the shift linkage off of the transmission. So for this, you'll need a 12 millimeter. All right, and then this part here will slide off. It looks like they may have an aluminum bushing in here, but it slides off, right? And then we're left with this part here. Normally it has a clip that goes around it. The way I like to get the pin out, most people call this a B pin, right? I use the old like AC compressor bolts, 12 millimeter head, so it'd be like an M8. I like the ones with a little tapered head. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it has a little tapered head. It fits in there perfect, right? I'm gonna take my little 2-pound sledge. And it comes out just like that. Now once that pin is out, you slide that off, Now our shifter assembly is disconnected. Now I need to take the exhaust off. So while we're here on the back side of the engine, I'm going to go ahead and remove these 2 bolts. They're 19 millimeter. And then I'm going to remove this bell housing bolt. That's a 17 millimeter. Alright, so I went ahead and bust those off of my Milwaukee impact. Those 2 19s here, and the 17 right here. Alright, and then if you had an aftermarket header, you could, or a stock header, you could disconnect it up here and make access to the 17 mil bolt here pretty easy. They have an aftermarket header on this application, but should be able to still get a 17 wrench on here and break that loose. Alright, so I was able to get that 17 millimeter bolt out with my wrench. Now, if you have one that's a little more in stock trim, it may have a dust cover over here, and it may have some little braces right here. But they're like a 14 millimeter or 17 millimeter down here, and a 12 millimeter up top. It may have one in the top, or one in the front and one in the rear. It may have a couple bolts up top and one at the bottom, and the same for the rear. The little dust plate is usually 10 millimeter bolts, so if you need to take that off, or if you have that, you need to take that off too. This particular unit doesn't have that, that's why I'm not showing taking that off. Another thing, factory, it would have a torque mount here. Obviously you can see that they don't have the torque mount on here. If it had the torque mount, I would recommend just taking the 2 14 millimeter bolts out over here and leaving the actual mount on it, because we're going to drop the transmission out the bottom. No need to disconnect it here. But if you so choose to, it's 17 millimeters here. But before we go back to the top, we're going to remove the slave cylinder and there's 2 12 millimeter bolts right here. Alright, so now the slave is disconnected. Now let's move to the top. Alright, so again, this car has some aftermarket options, such as this intake here. So if it had a factory intake box, you're going to need to take off the factory intake box as well as the factory intake tube. So I just got an 8 millimeter nut driver, and I'm removing the clamp to remove this intake. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and disconnect the battery. Simple enough. Take my 10 millimeter and remove the ground strap down here, and I'm going to remove the bracket that holds the clutch slave line. And then we can just take our slave cylinder and set it to the side over here, just where nothing's interfering with it. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is disconnect this reverse sensor. Alright, and then we need to disconnect the starter. So we've got our signal wire, and then there's a 12 millimeter nut. In some cases, if you have a aftermarket starter, they come with a 13 millimeter nut on them, so just FYI. Alright, and that's our power wire for the starter. Now to get the starter off, it's 2 14 millimeter bolts. One is kind of right here, and the other one's going to be kind of down on the bottom at the back. Alright, so I got our starter off, and you can see this is the bolt that's at the back. The starter kind of sits in there like this, so it's kind of at the back and at the bottom. Then we have a 14 millimeter bolt up here, and the starter's out of the way. One last thing, disconnect the speed sensor. I almost missed that. It slides off, it's at their back. Once we get to that point, we can go ahead and remove transmission mount. This car was originally automatic. You can always tell because the automatic mount comes up at an angle. The manual comes out flat. So this has a conversion mount. Yours may not look exactly like this. So as you can see, I've got my floor jack under. I actually put it directly under the header, and I didn't really jack up on it. I just put it to where it's touching the header so that it supports it when I remove this engine mount. Alright, so now that we got the transmission bolt out, I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of the bell housing bolt. So we've got one, it's kind of right here, one right here, and there should be one right in this area. So there's just 3 more left. They're all 17 millimeter. Alright, so we got the last 3 bell housing bolts loose. Now we're going to get them out real quick. Transmission is starting to split from the engine already, so that's a good thing. So now just kind of support the transmission with one hand and let down the jack with the other hand. And you ain't got to go super far, just go until the mount clears the body over here, and then it's ready to slide out. Now all I'm doing is just grabbing the transmission and setting it on the ground from the top. So once the transmission's on the ground, I lift the car up just a little bit and then jack the jack back up just to keep the tension off the engine mounts. And I get it high enough to where I can slide the transmission out from the car. And there you go. Alright, so for this particular build, the customer supplied an XTD 6-puck sprung clutch. It all comes with the new clutch disc, pressure plate, and it came with a new throwout bearing. We're going to be installing an M-Factory LSD. If you're interested in seeing me install the LSD into the transmission, be sure to check out the LSD install on my channel. Alright, so we got to throw a clutch on this thing. We have to take out these bolts that go around and hold the clutch on. They're 10 millimeter 12 point. Look at this clutch disc. Holy crap. He drove this thing here too. How? How? Look at that. Jeez. Alright. We're going to take the flywheel off next so that we can replace the pilot bearing, because it feels pretty notchy too. So these are 17 millimeter 12 point. We've got the flywheel off, and I knocked the old pilot bearing out. You have to knock it out through the back. So this is the back side, so we got a new pilot bearing here. Just kind of, it don't sit all the way flush. Has a little bit of a lip left. So that's ready to go back on. All right, so now that I've got the pilot bearing back in there, along with the flywheel, I'm gonna install a new clutch. So I usually just take the clutch disc, all right, put the alignment tool that's supplied with it, and stick it in our pilot bearing. And then I'll take the pressure plate, and I'll take a couple turns to, there's only one way to go on here. Just have to keep rotating it until all our dowels line up. That's it right there. And we'll start our bolts here. All right, and then again, it's a 10 millimeter 12 point to tighten them up. All right, so you can see, just kind of worked it around so that it didn't, didn't do everything on this side, then everything on this side. I have to kind of tighten it down gradually, and then take our alignment tool out. And now we're ready to install the transmission. We've got to install our new throwout bearing. All right, so some clutch kits, they come with a little pack of grease that you can put on the shaft here. This particular kit didn't come with any because it's an XTD. So I just got a little bit of multi-purpose grease. It doesn't take much. All right, I'm just going to put on the inside of my throwout bearing. And then this ball here, just take and put a little bit on that. Again, doesn't take a whole lot. Just something for a little lubrication. All right, and then make sure your spring is in your fork. All right, so the fork goes in here like this. So your throwout bearing, the little feet face inside, right? Oh, almost forgot. Just a little dab of grease right here on these forks. Just a little bit. No, again, not a lot. All right, it goes like this. Slide it through and push it down on that ball right here. Just like that. All right, so there you have it. In this video, we have successfully removed the transmission from the EG Civic, and now you know how to successfully take the transmission out of your EG with a B-swap, or for the most part, EK with a B-swap, and 94 to 01 Integra. I hope to see you stick around and watch some more videos. We've also got a video of installing LSD into the B-Series transmission, and also we'll be posting a video for reinstallation of the transmission into this Civic. As always, guys, I appreciate you leaving me a like, throw me a comment, let me know what you liked about the video. If you found the video helpful, let me know. As always, you can subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so that you know that each time I post a video. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you on the next one, and I'll see you later. Peace.